All right, good evening, everyone. We have our guest in the waiting room. We had a little technical difficulty, so we're going to skip on the intro, but we are not going to skip on the intro to Amy Trask tonight. Welcome to the show. I'm Glenn Hauser in the big chair, alongside my co-host, Mr. Boggins, Mr. Cameron Parker, and the always awesome Bree. We're fan-led Broncos-based podcast on the MHRT Network. You're currently watching the 5280 podcast. It goes live every Tuesday at 7654 on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. We have the brand new Wild Wild West podcast that starts tomorrow at 7:30, 6:30, 5:30, and 4:30. And that is an AFC West podcast that actually features fans from all four teams battling it out live. And then Thursday nights, we have Nothing Rhymes and Broncos Breakdown with Bronco Bill on Friday. And both of those are at 7654. She was the CEO of the Raiders organization from 1997 to 2013 and was Al Davis's right arm for that time. She's an author of You Negotiate Like a Girl and a lawyer, and currently is an analyst for CBS Sports and the CBS Sports Network. Also appears regularly on the Other pregame show as well as the NFL Today. Amy, we are thrilled to have you. Amy Trask, ladies and gentlemen.
Woo!
And given the history between all the AFC rivals, I will tell you that when I was sitting in that waiting room, I think that's what you called it, a waiting room, and it was so quiet. And I kept saying, hello, hello, like, Ferris Bueller. And nobody, it was stone cold silent. I thought, oh my gosh, they invited me on so they could ding dong ditch me. Here we go, Raider Bronco rivalry. And of course, I mean that in good fun and good spirit. But I really thought maybe you invited me on just so you could ditch me and all the Bronco fans could have a good laugh about it.
It's a late April Fools.
Absolutely. Now, Amy, I wanted to ask you about what you think of what's going on in the AFC West right now. It just seems crazy with this offseason, and on paper, this looks like the most solid division of all time. What are your thoughts?
Two thoughts. One, it does look extremely exciting, but I like that you use the phrase on paper, because one thing I learned throughout my career is every team in the league is one bad injury, one unfortunate circumstance away from being a very different team than it looks like on paper. And, you don't win games on paper. I remember very, very early in my career with the Raiders, I said something about we could have or we should have, and one of our player personnel men looked at me and said, coulda, shoulda, woulda, never played a down. So yes, on paper, this is absolutely, in my view, and okay, I spent almost 30 years in the AFC West, so I do have an AFC West bias. This is the most exciting division in the NFL. Just look at the four quarterbacks. Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and we all know it takes a lot more than a quarterback, but get your popcorn. This is an exciting division.
It is absolutely an exciting division, and what's more exciting is to have you on to talk about that. But what I wanted to kind of touch base on is you said that we maybe had ding dong ditched you, and I think that would be tremendously dangerous to do to the Princess of Darkness. May I just say, what an enviable and terrific nickname to be given and to carry on all of these years. Can you kind of give me an idea of how that first struck you when you initially heard it, and how you've carried towards that moniker for the rest of your career?
Oh my gosh, I love the question. I love that you raise this issue. And frankly, I love that you're a little scared of me because of the nickname. I will forever cherish my nickname. And I do hope when people hear it, they get a little frightened. Mike Silver, who at the time was with Sports Illustrated, wrote a feature in the magazine. And he quoted people who spoke to him off the record, anonymous sources. I think, that's what we call them, anonymous sources, not for attribution. And one of the things that these people who are identified, not by name, but identified as league executives, executives with other teams, team executives, league executives, whatever it was, they said, behind her back, we call her the Princess of Darkness. And it was so evident that it was not meant as a compliment. In fact, it was intended as an insult. Well, I kind of liked it. And Raider fans liked it. And they liked it. And I liked it. And then we all started loving it. And I just became the Princess of Darkness. And I think It's the best nickname ever. And I have this discussion with Mark Schlereth a lot because I know Stink is a good nickname, but Stink isn't even close to Princess of Darkness.
I'm sorry. I'm just awestruck by that because I hope to one day live up to that. So thank you.
By the way, the article that Mike wrote, not only did people say, a lot of anonymous sources say, behind her back, we call her the Princess of Darkness. There was another quote attributed to an anonymous source that said, she's a smarter, meaner Al Davis with a law degree. So whenever he and I were arguing, and we disagreed over the course of my career far more often than we agreed, and one of the biggest misconceptions about him was that you couldn't argue with him. We argued all the time. And I would often end by looking at him and I would say, smarter, meaner, with a law degree, and then I would just walk out of the room.
Absolutely fantastic. As one Dark Knight, has their Bruce Wayne, your Princess of Darkness also could be known as a trailblazer in general. As a trailblazer for women in the front office of the NFL, what efforts have you seen the NFL make to grow in diversity and inclusion? And what do you think the NFL could learn from the situations like John Gruden, Brian Flores, or Dan Snyder to push towards a more equitable future?
Well, it's stunning, infuriating, frustrating, heartbreaking that we're still having this conversation in 2022. I mean, what are we doing still talking about this in this day and age? To which many people say to me when I say that, Amy, it's been a problem forever and it hasn't gone away. And I understand that. But look, the best analogy I can use, and I use this regularly, is Apollo 13. I don't know how many of you and your listeners and your fans are familiar with what happened or saw the movie, but you've got these men up in Apollo 13 and something happens to Apollo 13. And they've got to figure out a way to get these men back to Earth alive. And in the movie, the character played by Ed Harris walks into a room at NASA where there's all these people sitting around a desk, and he dumps this pile of pieces and parts and bolts and just metal things on a desk. And he says, these are the only pieces and parts they have with them on Apollo 13. So using only these pieces and parts, find a way to get them back to Earth alive. Do you think anyone on Apollo 13 gave a damn about anyone's race, gender, ethnicity, age, religion of the people sitting around that table? No, they didn't. They just wanted to get back to Earth alive. And that's the way the world should work, that we hire people without regard to race, without regard to religion, without regard to gender, because none of those individualities have any bearing whatsoever on whether one can do a job. And I wish I knew the secret to getting people to understand that. It's incomprehensible to me that so many people don't hire in that manner.
Amen.
Yeah. To dip a little bit into the behind the scene or behind the lines, I should say, because you talked a little bit about your relationship with Alt Davis, and then now his son Mark Davis is now in full control. What has been the cultural shift that you've seen, like spending time with the Raiders for as long as you did to where it is now? And speaking from obviously the Broncos point of view, they hired Josh McDaniels. And so it seems like it's been on the complete reverse. Instead of trading the quarterback, they traded for a star wide receiver instead of trading the star wide receiver. So what have you seen as far as a cultural shift in what you've seen with the Raiders?
Well, I worked for with Al for almost 30 years. And then I made the decision, and it was the hardest decision of my life. It was the right decision, but it was the hardest decision I've ever made, to leave the organization about 18 months after he passed away. I had committed to him that I would make sure there was a smooth transition and I would handle all of the estate issues, which I did. And then I chose to leave. So I really didn't work with Mark Davis for a significant period of time and can't comment on that from a personal perspective. Where I thought you were going with the question was going to ask me about the relationship with Pat Ballen, because that was a very, very special relationship in my career as well. And I will note, and then go back to the question you asked, that what a lot of fans don't realize is teams can be fierce opponents and competitors on game day. And we were Oh my gosh, I remember that time Pat Ballen was standing on the field in the LA Coliseum and they thought they won the game in overhand time. And he raised his hands in the air, field goal, and they missed the field goal. And I was just so happy. But, thanks for letting me relive that fun little moment. We won the game. But, fierce competitors on game day, but your colleagues on all other days of the week and other days of the year. So I had a very special relationship with Pat Ballen. He did something very, very special for me during my career. But going back to your question about the Raiders, look, it is a different organization. You've got a lot of people around the league who inherited teams from their parents. Mark Davis inherited the team, Art Rooney, John Mara, and the list goes on and on. And some people run the team in the same manner their parents did. Some people run it differently. I think that's just the nature of life.
Mm-hmm.
So, Amy, in your book, you tell the story of calling the Raiders switchboard and asking to talk to the person who handled the internships for the organization. And the person that answered the phone didn't know what that meant. So you said, basically, I work for you and you don't pay me. So what prompted that call, and where did you think it would lead?
Okay. And I'm happy to answer that, but I always say this. I was in graduate school at the time, so it was part of the educational program. And I do recognize my tremendous, tremendous good fortune in being able to say what you just quoted, which is, when he said, I said, I'd like to join the organization. And I'd like to do an internship. And he said, well, what's an intern? Real gruff or gruffly. And I said, well, I work for you and you don't pay me. And he said, come on down. And I'm very, very quick to say and careful to say, I do recognize that not everybody has the ability, the fortune to say, I'll work and you don't have to pay me. But, if you're getting school credit, you are getting something of value. And by the way, now all of these internships pay. All the teams now pay their interns. So, all right, you kids today, you're going to get paid. Look, I fell in love with the game of football when I was in junior high. I love the game. It's an intellectual game. It's a cerebral game. It's like a game of chess with really fast, really strong, really powerful chess pieces. It's a game of matchups. How does your pass protection work with our pass rush and vice versa? Can your receivers cover can your corners cover our receivers? Can your linebackers handle our running backs? It's an intellectual game of matchups. And I fell in love with the game when I was in junior high. And I fell in love with the Raiders when I was a student up at Cal Berkeley. And the Raiders were at the time down the street. Came back to Los Angeles, where I'm from, to go to grad school. And that was coincidentally, or my good fortune, the same year that Al chose to move the team down. And I did. I contacted, I'm in grad school and I hear all these people talking about internships and externships. And I thought, well, that sounds like a fun way to do school. And so I called the team. I cold called.
Awesome.
Amazing. Amy, I did want to ask, obviously the Raiders Broncos rivalry is something that's been unmatched throughout the decades, but you recall your time with the Raiders so fondly. I don't expect you to convince Broncos country to love them or fall in love with them at the same way that you have over the years, but can you relive or recall a moment in the rivalry between the Broncos that you remember? You alluded to the snowballs, obviously.
We're going to talk more about those snowballs in a minute if you want to talk about this rivalry.
Let's talk about those snowballs, Amy.
So we're in Denver, Mile High, the old stadium, and we're walking off the field and Bronco fans are throwing snowballs at our players. And one of our offensive linemen, Lincoln Kennedy, and for those who don't know, Lincoln, a mountain of a man, huge, spectacular offensive lineman, spectacular human being, and just like a mountain of a man. So he starts going into the stands after, to talk, and he wasn't going to hurt them, but he's angry and he's going into the stands to give, as my grandma would have said, to give what for to those fans who are throwing snowballs at his head. And I decide, so here's Lincoln, an offensive lineman, and then all 5'3" of me, and it's 5'3" if I stand really, really, really tall and stretch, I'm going to go protect Lincoln. So, here I go. Oh, I can't let Lincoln go into the stands alone. I got to protect Lincoln. I got to take care of my teammate. So I go barging into the stands, and like all of our players are looking at me like, what are you doing? So then, security comes over, and we all laughed about it afterwards. But, the funny part that everybody teased me about for years was that I felt this compulsion that I had to go protect this enormous offensive lineman. But you know what? That's what teammates do for one another.
Amy, you've spoken a lot on your distaste for the direction the league has gone as far as excessive celebration penalties and post-play penalties in general. What has been your thoughts on the NFL's current emphasis on taunting?
I think, there's this, okay, you've got the girl on your podcast right now who went to law school. So I'm going to cite a Supreme Court case in the United States Supreme Court, Jacob Ellis. And it's a very, very famous case because one of the justices says and I forget whether he was talking about obscenity or pornography. It was one of the two. I think it might have been pornography. But either way, he says, he's essentially saying, I don't know how to define it, but I know it when I see it. I think it was pornography. That's my view on taunting. We know it when we see it. And if it's honest to goodness, horrific, poor sportsmanship taunting, that's one thing. If it's just unbridled enthusiasm that doesn't rise to the level of taunting, I am absolutely opposed to penalties. I think it's disingenuous to say to players, we want you to play with passion, play with emotion, play with enthusiasm, but the minute that play is over, turn it off and walk back to the huddle as if you're just a banker. So, I'm going to cite Jacob Ellis. As to taunting, we know it when we see it. And, if someone runs up to another player and shoves his finger in the guy's eye, okay, stop it. That's not okay. But dancing around and carrying on and going a little crazy, I love that. That's not taunting.
No ripping of chains.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had an Aqib Talib flashback there with the Indianapolis Colts game.
I was thinking about that too.
You talked about your time with the Raiders, and there's been a lot of growth locationally as well. And so what would you say your initial reaction was going from the Oakland Raiders to now the Las Vegas Raiders? And has that changed at all? And the other part of that, do you see another NFL location, in the future, potentially maybe even overseas? Because that's been a lot of discussion as far as overseas, London, maybe Mexico. Where do you see another NFL team overseas?
Interesting. Can I be silly and tease you and say Mexico's not overseas?
Yeah, I mean,
fair enough.
I'm just teasing. You guys got me kind of, when I thought you were doing the whole ding dong ditch thing, you got me kind of happy. Okay, first to your first question about the Raider relocation to Las Vegas. I was not with the team when ownership opted to move from Oakland to Las Vegas. And I have two reactions, and they're not mutually inconsistent. For the fans who are excited with the move, for the fans who are attending games in Las Vegas and enjoying the magnificent stadium, which it is, I'm thrilled for them. But for the fans in Oakland whose hearts are broken because the team left again and who are just, as I said, heartbroken, well, my heart is broken for them. And it is not mutually inconsistent to be happy for the fans who are happy and sad for the fans who are heartbroken. And that's my view on the stadium or on the relocation. The stadium itself is magnificent. As to an international expansion, I wouldn't be surprised. I think it would be very, very logistically difficult to do it in Europe. That doesn't mean the league won't do it at some point. I just think it would be a very, very tough thing to do. Not so much for the teams on the East Coast, but for the Broncos and the Seahawks and the Raiders and the Chargers and the Rams, that's quite a haul. And yeah, I know everybody says, but they can play one game on the East and then hop over. It's still a long flight back. And it also disrupts day-to-day things. Look, if you're a team and you're located in Europe, Tuesdays, as a general rule, unless you're playing on a short week or a different kind of week, are the days you bring free agents in to try them out. Well, if your team is located in Europe, you're not flying a free agent from California to London or Germany, to Frankfurt to look. You'll have a base ops in the United States where that guy will work out. but that means your coach isn't there, your GM isn't there, they're watching remotely. Now, look, over the course of the pandemic, we got used to doing things remotely, but it'll be a big adjustment if they move a team to Europe. I think Mexico is a far easier move logistically, as is Canada.
So, Amy, if we could ask you one more question before we let you go, and thanks again for coming on tonight. In NFL history, there have to have been tens of thousands of players, administrators, staff, executives, the works. And when the NFL commemorated its 100th anniversary, you were named among the top 100 greatest game changers in the history of the entire league. And I was wondering who gave you that news and what did that honor mean to you?
Okay, so we just talked about me being the princess of darkness and all mean and fierce and ferocious. When I learned about it, I cried. I was at home and I don't remember whether I saw something on Twitter and turned on the TV or I turned on NFL Network and saw it there, but I learned about it publicly. I didn't learn about it privately. And when I heard the news, and Condoleezza Rice did a piece on it, I just cried. I was so overwhelmed. It was so unexpected. And the funny part of that story is I immediately called my husband and I was crying and I was choking out that, that I just got named one of these 100 people. And his response was, well, I'm thrilled for you, but could you not call me crying again? I thought someone died. He thought, someone died or something bad happened. I had a car accident. But it was overwhelming, and it was just a tremendous, tremendous honor that meant the world.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we loved your stories and your answers. And I promise we didn't put you in we weren't going to play ding dong.
You guys are being so kind and gracious and understanding that I have a hard back end on this. But if you have time, I would share one moment about Pat Ballen. If you think your listeners
absolutely.
Pat Ballen played a very special role in my career. And yes, we were adversaries on game day, and there were depositions involving lawsuits in which we were on the opposite side of the depositions. And by the way, he was hilarious in those depositions. And I mean that in a good way. He just was giving Al all kinds of grief. But when Pat, when I joined the Raiders and the league were already embroiled in litigation. And I will, till the day I have no breath left, always act like a third grader and say, and they started it. We weren't the plaintiff. We were the defendant. So, Mom, they started it. But we were embroiled in this litigation when I joined the club. And it very soon became my plan to find a way to figure out how to settle all of this, because I don't think litigation is the way to run a business. And so I started on my plan of how do I get all of this settled? And when Pat perceived what I was doing, he was the first team owner to approach me and say, Amy, I see what you're trying to accomplish. I'd like to help you. It was very, very special.
Wow.
That's amazing.
So crazy.
I've not heard that story. That's great.
That's so cool.
That's amazing.
I thank you, Amy, for all of your time.
Thank you guys for having me on. It was an absolute blast. You guys are a lot of fun, even if you did try to ding dong ditch me.
Would never. Bye, Felicia.
Well done.
You told us you're going to be at the 80-degree beach tomorrow, so I think you got us all back. So
yeah, I did, didn't I?
Thanks again.
A lot,
thank you so much, Amy.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, man.
Wow, I could have listened to her all
I'm
day.
out of here, y'all. Like that.
Yeah. Bree just
my
found.
career.
Yeah. Bree just found her Olympus. That's awesome.
Yeah,
That is amazing.
doesn't get any better.
Yeah, it really doesn't get any better. I mean, to go for her to go like behind the enemy lines a little bit to talk about it from the Raiders perspective, but also to talk about it from like the love of Pat Ballen, like at the very end of that, I thought was pretty great. Cause because people always say that, and she said it best, like rivalries are great, but there's that mutual respect with one another, that is honestly at times a misconception, right? Because like a fan's perspective is like you just absolutely like disrespect the Raiders or you disrespect the Chiefs or disrespect the Chargers, but there's like a mutual respect with a lot of those teams.
Yeah, I mean, Man, what just a inspiring person to have on the show in general, and yeah, just her spirit animal, absolutely.
Yeah.
What an inspiring person just to have on the pod in general. And like, if you haven't had a chance to look her up as much as you should, like she has been involved in so much, including the big three, if you're a basketball fan. So definitely everybody watching, go and check her out.
I know. And that was, I'm just grateful that she gave us the time that she did, and then to stick around to do a special story that was appropriate for our fan base was awesome. So, again, she has that, You Negotiate Like a Girl book, and I would recommend it. I blew through that, and the Al Davis stories are absolutely hilarious. I mean, this guy drops like multiple F-bombs per sentence, and I was joking that his swear jar would have to look like a grain silo. But anyway, so we should move on. We've got some other stuff to talk about, and Mundungus, I did enjoy when she mentioned Cameron that he should probably buy a map or something, or a globe or something along those lines.
I was when you got Amy Trask on the show, you feel flustered. So I mean,
right.
So I thought I had segues prepared. I didn't. I saw him and I just saw clouds. That's all I saw.
On cloud 9.
I don't normally get nervous to the point of passing out ever, and
yeah.
Good stuff, guys. What are we talking about next?
All right, so next,
Melvin Gordon.
Let's talk about Melvin, right? I mean, like, he wasn't going to be a top on the list, but so Melvin is still out there.
Mm-hmm.
We still need a tandem back for Javonte. I'm sorry. They worked wonderfully well last year, and sources said to Pro Football Talk the other day that they valued the contract for a 1-year contract for Gordon at only $2.5 million.
One absurd. 2, do it now. Do it yesterday.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Because I remember when I was predicting like 4.5, everyone was like, "That's ridiculous." Like,
I don't know. That's reasonable.
Yeah, I know, right? That like as far as ridiculous, like low, like he wouldn't come back for that. However, I think we are continually seeing the value of RB drop. It exponentially, and then you keep seeing more and more mocks out there with more and more RBs thrown in there. You're just kind of like, at what value do you bring him back on? And apparently that's 2.5 currently, which would be fantastic. I will take that. Thank you.
Y'all, that seems like a dangerous precedent to set, to say that just any running back is replaceable and they grow on trees, because I don't really come from that aspect. I think if it wasn't broke, don't fix it. I don't understand why. And obviously, I think the Broncos want to bring him back. I know there's mutual interest in doing so, but I think it would just be silly. That would come up as a regrettable decision at the end of next season if they don't retain Melvin Gordon and he goes somewhere else and decides to have 1,000+ yards a year somewhere else, or we don't see the same kind of offensive efficiency that we do from the Denver Broncos in the run game. Not saying Javonte Williams can't handle, but you don't really want to put that kind of workload on this growing running back, at least not in my book. And I'm pretty fired up about this because I still don't know. It's probably going to come a lot closer to the start of training camp, and we're all very well ready to wait out.
And it's funny you mentioned that, Bree, because I feel like whenever I see a deal, like I'll just use the Broncos signing of Alex Singleton for an example, like the 1 year and like 1.3 million or something like that. Like I see those types of contracts, and I'm just, there's one I think from the standpoint of if that was the deal that was always on the table, why sign it now? Why and versus like waiting out your market, and then seeing if you can get a much larger deal, and so like I feel like that's also the case with Melvin Gordon. I mean, obviously, if you're going to sign him for 1 year and $2.5 million, make it happen as soon as possible, but I mean, at the same time, it's like, to what you alluded to, Bree, it's like maybe he just knows his market and he knows exactly like right around the point in time, like when he signs. But again, like we're talking about a deal that's one 1 year, $2.5 million. So like why not just sign it now? Whoever the team is, just sign it now.
Yeah. I just don't get it. I mean, these two guys combined for nearly 2,000 yards rushing, and Bree hit the nail on the head. I mean, the fact is this league now is a two-back league. You got to preserve these guys. The RB1s that were strictly RB1s are Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, do you see a trend? What's going on with these guys? And it's a shame. And I can tell you, like, why do I get the feeling like that? Parents are not going to push their kids to play running back. They're going to be pushing them to play wide receiver.
Well, what I also felt was really interesting, and correct me if I read this wrong, but Melvin Gordon recently changed also his representation in form of his agent. So perhaps there's also something going on there that the negotiations weren't to his liking, or either the team-based as well. So I think it's interesting for him. I think it bodes well that he's still looking over options. But yeah, Glenn, what does that mean as far as the worth and the standing of the position itself? Because if it's so replaceable, I don't think you want to put yourself in that career path.
Yeah, and for a player that's coming up on I don't want to say coming up on the necessarily end of the career, but they are the back nine of their career. 1 year, 2.5 doesn't bode well for what you're going to get post that. Right. Like that doesn't necessarily look good. And so I don't like for him to accept that. You're pretty much accepting that that's essentially the structure you're going to be looking at going forward. But then the other side of the coin is Javonte hasn't not been a 1-2 punch, right? Like he in North Carolina, him and Michael Carter last year, him and Melvin Gordon. So it's just like what at the end of the day do you really value?
Yeah. Well, and even with Melvin Gordon, just strictly looking at it from also the contract perspective, and I know the fumbles and everything are catastrophic in this type of debate, but his production far outweighs a 1 year, $2.5 million deal. And that's the other thing too. It's just like he's been, if you look at it statistically, I think he's almost 40, 50 touchdowns. He's almost like averaging 10 touchdowns a season. It's a ridiculous number. And so from the standpoint of 1 year, $2.5 million, if the Broncos did sign him, I wouldn't be surprised if, the Broncos look at it from the standpoint, or Gordon, I should say, looks at it from the standpoint, he's got a chip on his shoulder. And I mean, every single player at the start of a new year sort of has its own chip on its shoulder. But you sign a 1 year, $2.5 million deal to be a backup, because that's also backup money, to be a backup to Javonte Williams, you've got a chip on your shoulder.
Absolutely.
So Mundungus pops in the chat. He said, what are your thoughts on Williams and Boone? So do you think Mike Boone would be a good tandem back, good RB2?
It just, the problem is we haven't seen a whole ton of him, right? Like even in Minnesota, he was behind Cook and Madison. So it's tough to say. What we saw, the very little we saw, looked decent, looked good, and that's something you hope can progress. I mean, at this point, if you're not bringing back Melvin Gordon, it's kind of like Mike Boone or a draft pick. That's essentially what you're looking at, which is going to be a very, very equivalent, or like pretty equal as far as I'm concerned. So.
And with Melvin Gordon, I mean, there's not a person. Andre the Giant would have had that ball knocked out of his hand against the Eagles at that point. I mean, there was just absolutely no blocking.
Even Kansas City.
I saw that, Henry from the Titans, again, another stud running back that gets hurt and things go downhill. The shelf life of RBs is so short. You can get so much amazing production for so much longer if you keep a rotation rather than going all King Henry about it and get them injured. And Johnny, I agree. So let me look at a couple other comments. We actually have Raider Casper, seeing Amy Trask name, had to pop in. Going to be a fun, tough season this year. Much respect, Raider. Thank you so much for popping in. She was fantastic.
Yeah. You can just rewind a little bit if you want to watch it, and then catch up with us later.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Brad joining us from down under. Thank you, Brad, for popping in on all our shows. We appreciate that. Hey guys, loving the podcast. As a massive Aussie Broncos fan, so excited for the coming season, counting the days, and excited about a Jerry Jeudy breakout, hopefully. And I think you're going to get your wish, Brad.
That's the plan.
Aren't you also kind of there's a little bit of names on the back burner here. I'm talking with my hands because I'm like super caffeinated and like excited. But what you're gonna get,
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with my hands, so they're just gonna be here. I digress. You're going to see Jerry Jeudy obviously get that run and be able to show us what he's made out of, right?
Yeah.
There's no more excuses after this season. But what I think we're really failing to note as well is KJ Hamler coming in and being the speedster for the Denver Broncos. That speed is unmatched, and he might possibly be the fastest in the AFC West now that Tyreek Hill is gone. So I'm really looking forward to his breakout year, because if you're thinking about Russell Wilson being one of the largest bomb threat, 30-yard, chuck him in the air, see what happens in the end zone kind of guy, KJ Hamler is the person you want in the back of the end zone. And as far as injuries being all healed up and ready to go, he should be ready to start at the beginning of the season. I think he's healing up quite nicely. So I'm really excited about that. And Mundungus just put in that he's actually really excited about Albert O. I'm glad that he brought that up, because that's another one that we weren't anticipating with the Noah Fant trade, right? So obviously something happened there that put the Broncos in a position to make a pretty dominant statement by keeping Albert O and putting in his TE1. So Albert O could have a tremendously large year, even if Russell Wilson isn't known for targeting his tight end. So how do you guys feel about the targets for the Denver Broncos?
Yeah, I think that the thing with the Broncos offense, and we talk about breakout players, you could go up and down like the entire roster with wide receivers or some tight ends, or in this case, a tight end, as potential breakout candidates. And there's no wrong answer. Like there's really no, and so I think that, like, when you finally have a quarterback, you could go out and say Cortland Sutton finally bursting onto the scene and being, a true wide receiver one, or Tim Patrick, who people feel is a wide receiver one, him finally bursting onto the scene, although he's kind of been quietly bursting onto the scene year after year after year. But yeah, I think the KJ Hamler one is fascinating for me, because if there's one player that, really compares very favorably to like a player that he had on his previous roster, and that being Tyler Lockett, that would be KJ Hamler. And so I think that, anytime that you have that type of reliability, and I think that that's also a misconception too with the Broncos and Seahawks, is like he had Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse, like not exactly like world beaters per se, but I mean but I think that like those were still reliable and, guys that Russell trusted. And so when you have guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and Tim Patrick, those are reliable guys that you can count on.
I kind of feel like we're watching them come into the NFL like as receivers and tight end right now, because like we've seen, it's almost like we've seen kind of what they can do, but like what can they do at this level, and this level being what can they do with Russell Wilson now, like what is this next level that they could present in the NFL. So it's kind of like a fresh start that I'm insanely excited for. I mean, you have a ridiculous wide receiver core, very underrated. And then you have a tight end who I believe he's like top 3 all time, I believe, as far as 40 time for a tight end. Like he is a speedster, a serious vertical threat. It just gives so much opportunity, and it gives Russell Wilson something that he's never had before. He's surrounded with like from a lot of potential to even mediocre potential that's still like on the offensive line potentially that's better than anything he's ever had.
So I remember Tim Patrick last year, and this was when we all had the hope, it was at the beginning of the season, and they asked him about if he was worried about targets and sharing the balls, if there were enough balls to go around. And he pointed out that, the better the offense is, the more plays that they're going to have, and the more time they're going to be on the field, the more balls everyone's going to get. So he wasn't worried about it at all. So just to Sophia asks, is Alberto ready to be tight end one? And I would say yes.
I think that if any time is a good time to cut your teeth and take a tackle at that position 1 for tight ends, I think now is the perfect way to do it, because you're obviously having Russell Wilson as your quarterback, which just ups your ability exponentially to be efficient in that position. And I don't know if he's going to see a whole lot of blocking, which was a question mark there for Alberto. There was the drops as well. But I think what you're going to be looking for here is yards after catch with Alberto is going to be a lot higher. So he's going to be able to grab the ball. And because he's such a big bodied threat, like if you've ever seen this guy in person, he's massive, and he's just fast too for being that big. So I think that it is time to start having the conversation, and not because of what he's shown us, but because of his ceiling is basically there. I think he could take a large leap this season. And unfortunately, Noah Fant got the short end of the stick there, and he still has some proving for him to do. He's going into his 5th year. That's kind of where you know or you don't know. And I think the Seahawks will have to figure that out. But now it's Alberto time. And I think he obviously can be tight end 1. I don't know if there's a better decision there. I wouldn't trust to put somebody in that position and say that they could do a better job than him.
So out of the question, like where is he in the Broncos' plans? Have you heard anything about him?
About who? Sorry, I missed that.
Eric Saubert.
Oh, yeah. No, I don't even know if he's potentially in the. I mean, I think there are potential in this upcoming draft to fill that space, along with. I mean, Beck is kind of your fullback now, but and then oh gosh,
Tomlinson.
Yeah, huge boy. So I don't know, because Saubert kind of, I mean, he was good, he was solid, he had his moments, and I think that could be something that we readdress if after the draft, if it's something that we don't address during the draft.
Yeah, there's a guy, and I had mentioned this on the Nothing Rhymes show with tight end, and it was a player that was in free agency, not Eric Saubert, although I wouldn't, shy away from wanting it back, because I would love Saubert back, because he really kind of burst onto the scene like later on in that year, almost like he had a really good preseason, then you like completely like forgot about the name, and then like when you're on the tail end of the season, it's like, oh wow, he's here, like oh wow, you actually you're still on this team and you're contributing.
Well, I think the reason you saw the output you did from Saubert is also he fit the mold for what Shermer was trying to do, and instead of having to like work around the players, which is what Hackett and the rest of his coordinators are trying to do, is build around their players. Last year Saubert was kind of just a drop-in piece, so there's a potential there that maybe you could still see that output from him, but I don't think it's going to match up with the direction that they want to head in, which would serve to the strengths of Alberto. So that's the only reason why I don't think the name is really important. But I think Sean Byer is also on the roster still, and I
mean, Saubert would do something well last year, and Lindsey Bebo would always point out that he was the guy that Urban Meyer cut in order to put Tim Tebow as tight end.
And to what I was talking about earlier, there is a guy in the free agent, class right now that at least is intriguing to me, and that's Chris Herndon.
Rob. Okay.
And that's Chris Herndon, the guy that was formerly with the New York Jets as tight end 1, and then he ended up getting traded to the Minnesota Vikings with the Irv Smith trade, and he became tight end 1 with them because of that. So I think that if there's a guy out there who's a pretty reliable blocker and a decent enough or a threat, I almost said wide receiver, but a threat in the passing game, Herndon could possibly, be that type of guy. So I think that it's going to be fascinating. One thing that I've been kind of comparing it a little bit to, as far as with Russell Wilson, I think back to, his time at NC State. Obviously, you're going from like, the ACC to the Big Ten. But in this case, like, it feels almost like reminiscent in some ways of Russell Wilson transferring to Wisconsin, like to the better team, and so I think that there's a strong possibility. We say it so often, but there's a strong possibility that we do see the best Russell Wilson of his entire career, because of the fact that, you're basically looking at it from the standpoint of coaching staff, the people that he has around him, the people that he has around him in the front office. Like it feels sort of like back when he transferred to Wisconsin.
Yeah, I do feel for any of the players that aren't on the team right now, the skilled players that are seeing summer camp at Russell's house, and wishing that would be a pretty cool thing, So speaking of Bronco free agencies, and there's one other topic that we definitely have to get in, and that's with the prospective owners. But things have come to a screeching halt. I don't feel like there's been that second wave or that third wave yet. And I was just wondering if you had any predictions on what moves you foresaw in the coming weeks.
Bryce Callahan, Kareem Jackson, immediately, like yesterday. I can't overstate it enough, but Nick Kendall brought up a really interesting point the other day on the pod for Let's Talk Broncos, that, Kareem Jackson may not want to have to go through OTAs again and through the long offseason programs prior. As a seasoned veteran, doesn't really need to. Obviously, his body takes a lot of hits. He's worn down, and we want to keep him as fresh as possible. Also, coming back to Denver during that time, let him enjoy his summer. So maybe my trepidation with not having them sign just yet is a little bit of that veteran senioritis sort of thing, where they're just kind of waiting it out to the last possible moment. But those are the two that I'm anticipating the most. And when they're done, I can rest a little bit easier. I can take a deep breath, and I can stop bringing it up on every single show that I'm on because I'm tired of it.
I was going to say too, and a lot of that too is what we talked about earlier, as far as with Melvin Gordon, maybe he just understands his market. And that's the other aspect of it too, is they just know their market. And so now it's just a matter of do they want to go back with the team that they were previously, with the scheme fit that they were, previously, or do they want to be kind of with the same scheme fit with the Los Angeles Rams or the Minnesota Vikings, with, Ed Donatel over there. So it's one of those cases where, maybe they just know their market. And so I'm not going to say no. You guys know this. I'm not going to say no to, bring, and Bree obviously has been pounding the table from day one, as far as, reunions with guys like Bryce Callahan and Kareem Jackson. So I'm not going to, shy away from it. So I think that, it's really important to kind of keep that team together.
Yeah, I don't think anything outside of the obvious. I don't see any big splashes coming. I definitely see it's going to be, or perceive it to be, a lot of hole filling and potentially some reunions. But besides that, we're just gonna. I just think we're gonna get ourselves in a position where we can go BPA in the draft as much as possible, with in consideration for future positions and players running the extent of their contract at the end of this coming year.
And then I was going to say, and that's the plan anyway, right? When you go into the draft, you want to get best player available anyway.
That's what you want.
Yeah.
You hope for.
Regardless of system fit?
Mm-hmm. No. I mean, sometimes, even whatever you're going to, whatever people think about Fangio, he did say that you don't always, you want to go for scheme fit as much as you can, but at the end of the day, you go for the best player. Like Patrick Surtain, there was a lot of conversations of if he was a good scheme fit coming into Denver, but at the end of the day, he's just such a good player. You just hope that he can transition well enough into your scheme.
First and foremost, that's future Hall of Famer Patrick.
Oh,
Surtain,
yeah. No, I should have wrote it.
Yeah,
I should have
full
tattooed
name
on my forehead. Yeah,
Thank you.
Fine. Yeah, no,
No, it's a good point. And I think it brings up an interesting question of one, who's ready for the draft, and two, where do you think they're going? Because 64 is pretty hard to kind of guess to, I guess. I mean, you're basically making wild predictions at this point, unless you think they're going to go after a position in general. Is that tight end? Is that Trey McBride? Is that too homery for you guys?
I just don't know if Trey's going to even be there. I really don't. I mentioned it on Nothing Rhymes. I think there's a window where he's a first round pick. I really do. I think that, probably between the mid 20s to the end of the first, I think that there's a window where he's a first rounder. So I would say probably between the mid 20s to the mid 40s is probably what you're talking about for Trey. But I mean, if you can go get a defensive players though, in a very defensive heavy draft, I mean, I ended up taking, in the mock draft that I did it for Predominantly Orange, I ended up taking Travis Jones, and Travis Jones and Nick Benito, and JoJo Doman back to back as far as a defensive heavy draft. So, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos did something like that.
So Mundungus thinks that Peyton trades up into the first or top of the second. Now, Mike, you got to tell us what you think that he'd have to give up to
Yeah.
achieve that jump. I think it's
I'm interested in that too, because I don't see Peyton doing it because of how much he values the number of picks that he has, but he's also been such a chess master that I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if he did.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think it's been widely known that he likes to do that barbell strategy where he kind of goes top heavy and then middle kind of lingers and then heavy at the bottom as well. So like I think it's possible. First round is quite the leap. That's quite the leap. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think maybe 15 picks up. But it would have to be for a specific player that they really, really like, which would have to be most likely a very valuable position like a tackle or an edge.
And it's one of those things too, is that this draft, there's no clear cut number one. There's no clear cut top five.
Yeah,
it's going to be very, very interesting. And the fact that we're presently not picking until the end of round two is going to be interesting.
Yeah,
I mean, even the Saints doing a blockbuster trade to a couple
weird
first round picks and giving all sorts of capital. What are they doing that for?
Right. Yeah, I mean, what they moved up one spot basically with like an extra pick. Yeah.
And got next year. So I mean, I think they're trying to build for next year because that 2023 QB draft is a whole heck of a lot different than this year. But yeah, this is going to be a fun draft to watch for people that. I mean, if you're a Broncos fan and kind of like a casual draft fan, I don't know if it's going to be necessarily as exciting since the Broncos don't have a pick until 64. But for those of you who really like to delve deep into the draft, it's going to be a very interesting draft to watch because, I mean, I don't know the last time we've seen it be so jumbled in the top five. Like we usually around this time have a pretty darn good guess who's going top three. But it's just completely jumbled. I mean, when you've heard KT potentially going down to 9 now, you're just like, what is happening? So it's going to be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, so Brad asks how early on in the season we play the Chiefs, and Brad, that while the opponents have been announced, the actual dates of the games have not. So I think that comes in May. So we'll be if
the league's smart, first week.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. So you can get your tickets, you get your flights scheduled, so you can get on top of that. What was interesting last season, though, obviously, is the Broncos didn't play the Chiefs until after the bye week, and actually, specifically, most of their AFC divisional games or AFC West games were not until after the bye week as well. So you had Kansas City both in the second half of that, and I think it is really important to note that if they can get that out of the way, because Kansas City was a beatable team last year in both of those games, and I think they're going to be just as beatable now going into the 2022 season. So if that can be a sooner game, and I think you might actually see that considering where the AFC West is standing now, you'll see a lot of night flex games as well. So really like Monday night football, Sunday night football, they're going to want to get those done kind of relatively soon to kind of drum up anticipation and excitement for the season. I don't see them waiting very long to have that first matchup, just because if the NFL is as smart as I think they are, they're going to make a lot of money on that game.
And we all know that there haven't been a whole lot of primetime games anymore for the Broncos. And so, the opportunity for, primetime games is officially there. And I will say, if we do open on Monday Night Football with the Raiders, I might be a little bit disappointed because it just seems to be the theme, right? Like the Broncos just seem to always open up, or their first Monday Night Football opponent is always the Raiders. I think back to a few years ago where they played the Raiders on Monday Night Football, and being on the Mountain Standard or on Mountain Time, like it was like an 8:20 game, which is almost like East Coast time for the most part for a game. So yeah, I'm hoping that if the Broncos get something like that, it's not that ridiculous.
I think they're going to get I think they'll be the Thursday night game at the Rams, so where the Rams get their banner hung. I think Russell Wilson is going to be coming back to play his division foe, but in a different uniform.
Peter King suggested that, I believe, or that was his guess, I should say. I think that was his guess.
So we have just a couple minutes left before we go tonight. But Mike Kliss the other day came out with a list of 9 prospective buyers of the team, and there were several that had other that owned other teams in different sports, and one of the owners was the owner of DraftKings, actually. But the by far the one that looks to be the wealthiest is one of the Waltons, Robson Walton, at $66 billion. He does own 3 places in Colorado, so he has that foot in the state. But what do you think of Stan Kroenke having some Walmart competition in Colorado?
It's an interesting concept to me, because obviously when you pair that, you got to remove the biases. And then once they become the owner of the Broncos, you have to remove them almost entirely, because that's the person who's fronting your most beloved company and team. So I think it would be really interesting. The bare mention of Stan Kroenke and how that all made us kind of flinch a little bit too, but the money would be there, and the prowess to overtake and create championship teams would also be there. So I think it depends on what you value the most. I know it's not so shiny and great to think about Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk owning the team because of their personal lives and attitudes. But if you think about what's best for the team, is it money? Is it meddling? Is it someone who's going to take respect to the team itself? Do the Waltons care about the Broncos? I think we're looking too much on a replacement for Pat Ballen. So I think whoever gives us the most money and is able to control the team in a way that operates and doesn't move the stadium too far out of the greater Denver area, I'm all on board. Past that point, as long as it's money, I don't care.
What I was going to say, and I think that's probably maybe like the one con of having an auction. Because I mean, like, you have a winner take all, and you just never know which way or which owner's certainly going to go, right? And so I think that it's basically like a winner take all WWE match, right? I mean, like, I think that when you have the opportunity for an auction, it does, and this is the biggest pro, is it allows a lot of people who maybe not as qualified have the opportunity to own a football team. I thought it was really interesting too when Kliss mentioned Robert Smith again. And I thought it was interesting that he mentioned him too, and also that Smith has not publicly denied it. Like, it's been leaked that he denied it, but it's not been publicly coming from him that he denied it. Another one was obviously Byron Allen. That was out there, but the Smith comment that Kliss had in his piece kind of still sticks with me a little bit, because even for the auction that he's doing, he says that he basically would own the team if he wants it, kind of deal. And so it's just like, so what's the point of that sentence if it's going to be an auction?
Right. So
yeah, I'm kind of okay with Walton as long as he shows more enthusiasm for the team than his greeters. Because they never seem happy. And I don't want that for Broncos country. Like, let's sell those tickets. All right.
For sure. Let me pull up one more comment. It brings us full circle before we say goodnight. Phoenix Raider 602. Thank you for popping in. I love it. At Raider Casper, it was a great interview. Not even sure how I got here. Amy will always be the Raider Princess of Darkness. Great show. It hurts to say that about a Broncos show, but Phoenix, thank you.
It's our princess.
That means a lot.
Darkness training. She has brought you here with her spell. So that's what it was.
But let me just say, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share, and turn on notifications so that you can catch all the content which is posted or when it's posted. Tune into our other podcasts. Tomorrow, the debut of the Wild Wild West at 7:30, 6:30, 5:30, and 4:30. And that is the show that has fans from all 4 teams in the division. Nothing Rhymes is on Thursday. Broncos Breakdown hosted by Bronco Bill on Friday. And those are 7, 6, 5, 4. Again, we want to thank Amy Trask. I could have talked to her all day. She was amazing.
Yeah.
We love you, Broncos country, and we will see you next week.